Sal, how are you?
Good, Todd. How you doing?
Thank you for having me on. John Conrad says you're the guy to talk to, man. So I appreciate you taking the time out of your day.
I don't know about that, but I appreciate the opportunity to be with you.
So we have never met in person. And so tell our audience your background because it's pretty impressive in this sector.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. Well, a former merchant mariner, sailed
Mhm.
for 7 years, worked
Mhm.
ashore in the maritime industry, decided to swallow the anchor, come ashore, and sought a couple of degrees. I did a master's, dual master's in maritime history and nautical archaeology, got a PhD in military and naval history. I am a professor at a small university down in North Carolina called Campbell University, where I teach courses in maritime history and maritime security.
Wow.
I'm an adjunct with the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, where I teach a graduate level class in maritime industry policy. And then for about 5 years now, I've hosted a YouTube channel called What's Going On with Shipping.
Yeah, just subscribe to that. I got to put that in my daily scan, as we say here. So I am from, my family's from the Mississippi Gulf Coast back in the day. And I was talking to Colonel Rob Manis, who ran for Senate in Louisiana. And he's starting to try to develop that whole area again as a merchant marine, I guess, focused, maybe putting an academy there, not a merchant marine academy, but something smaller. And then really looking at shipyards in that region. Before we go into what's happening in the Gulf, what do you think of that? Is that whole sector going to grow across the U.S. in these areas?
I think so, and I've been actually working with the governor's office in Louisiana about that, and I think it's a great prospect for that. We kind of turned our eye against shipping there for a long time. We had to develop a
Yeah.
really bad case of sea blindness. We also got very fixated on the idea that sea power meant Navy power, which it does. I mean, there's an element in there, but it also means commercial. It means commercial shipping, whether it's the offshore oil industry, whether it's the international shipment of goods overseas, on the Great Big Blue Highway, or it's heading up the Mississippi in
Yeah.
for our inland waterways. It's really important. We are truly a maritime nation. One of the issues we've had over the years is, again, we've kind of pushed shipping off to the side, and that's been the case everywhere. I mean, you can't get onto a shipping terminal right now, and we take it for granted that the goods are going to arrive. And I think everybody had a big wake up call during COVID when the supply chain crisis hit, when all
Yeah.
of a sudden, we were without toilet paper, and that hit people where they lived. And, I think all of a sudden everybody realized that. And then we also had some very visible demonstrations about the fragility of the ocean shipping network, whether it's Ever Given stuck in the Suez or Dolly taking out the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore. So I think there's a lot more attention being driven toward the ocean today than ever before. It allows me to run a little niche YouTube channel that talks about
Yeah.
global shipping.
So I was talking to Colonel Manus, and he said the issue in that region is not land, it's not people so much, but it's welders and skilled technicians to go into these shipyards. Do you see that in other places around the country?
Oh, I think absolutely. The workforce is really key. I mean, we're having a hard time getting people to go to sea right now. And I think this has a lot to do with how we teach and educate not just people, but kids about
Mhm.
opportunities out there. I'm a college professor, and I could tell students
Mhm.
coming in as freshmen, listen, if you want a high paying job, I can get you out of this college right now and get you a high paying job real quick. It's going to be, a hands on job, but you're going to be able to make a good living for yourself. And we need to be able to have that vocational education out there. I'm a volunteer firefighter. I've been a volunteer firefighter for 25 years. Every time we ever go on a call and there's a little kid there, we give him a helmet, a little plastic helmet. We give him a book, with firefighting safety. We need to be doing that with shipping. We need to be getting the younger people involved in it from the very beginning, that there are opportunities out there in the vocational track. I'm a big kind of micro guy. I love the idea of shop and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I love being intellectual, but at the same time, I like being hands-on. I think there's a lot of opportunities out there, and we need to be getting those type, because that type of workforce doesn't go away. I mean, that is not going to be taken away by AI. We still need people to man the deck plates. We need the people to get on board to do the ship repair. There are some elements that we can modernize with that and really turn out really state-of-the-art shipyards, maybe, that are beyond what's being built overseas right now. One of the good things about being so far behind is we can start with a clean slate.
Mhm. So I spent a lot of time in Savannah in my life, and it's a big port city, and I'm very familiar with what's going on there. And I was talking to a congressional candidate, Eugene Yu. He's a Korean guy, and he's kind of the liaison between a lot of these Korean companies coming in. I think Trump wants to bring them in and build ships here first under their flag, and then kind of transition to U.S. companies. Do you agree with that strategy, I guess?
Well, first off, Savannah is a booming port. You want to talk about a port
Yeah.
in the United States that has absolutely just exploded, is a port like Savannah, because you're trying to feed the population that's there in the southeast part of the United States. And you can sit on the dock there in Savannah, have your cup of coffee, and just watch these massive container ships come by. Partnering up with allied shipyards is a smart idea. It really is. I mean, the
Mhm.
Koreans are really big on this. We saw Korea Hanwha go into the Philly shipyard, the old Philadelphia Navy shipyard.
Yeah.
And I like that idea a lot. The concern I have, I'm a big proponent of like the Ships Act and elements to try to help rebuilding the United States. I want to be careful that we're building ships for America, not building ships for Korea. But I
Yeah.
think, an agreement with Korea is a smart one. Let's bring some of their building processes over. Let's bring some of their management processes over. I think, some of their technology coming over. We've seen that. We've got Korea in Philly shipyard. We've got Italy up in the Fincantieri yard in Wisconsin. We've got Australia down at Austell in Mobile. It's a smart move. I mean, shipbuilding is much different than it was even 30 years ago. Modularity, we're talking about prefabrication. There's a lot that could be done. And what we're seeing right now is along the Gulf, for example, a lot of smaller shipyards, for example, in Louisiana, can help build larger ships. You may not build the large ship directly there in Louisiana, but you may build the key components for it
Yeah.
that can be floated over and then go to an assembly yard, and you put all the pieces together like a big Lego, ship.
So I'm real familiar with Ingalls Shipyard in Pascagoula, and that place is hopping. The last time I drove by there, I mean, it's there. I mean, you don't have the capacity to build the amount of ships we need in the U.S. at this point, do we?
Well, Ingalls is actually really interesting because they have an entire area undeveloped that they can develop. They just need assurances. One of the big problems you have is because we've shifted shipbuilding back in the 1980s, we decided, hey, we're gonna devote, Navy shipbuilding into our private yards. We're going to close down the public yards for shipbuilding. We're going to use them for repair. So we still have 4 Navy yards, but they do repair. But the private yards, we're going to just fixate on building U.S. government contracts. Well, the problem with government contracts is they come and go. They're at the whim of Congress, and you can authorize 20 ships. It doesn't mean you're going to fund 20 ships. And if I get a commercial contract to build 20 ships, I'm going to buy 20 sets of steel, 20 sets of engines, and more importantly, I'm going to buy them when it's cost advantageous to me. If steel is really high right now, I'll buy steel for 1 or 2 ships and wait until steel comes down. On government contracts, it's really tough. What Ingalls will tell you, what HII and Pascagoula will tell you is, listen, we can develop the other half of this yard and be pumping out Burke-class destroyers, America-class LHDs, new national security cutters as frigates as fast as the Navy and Congress can authorize that money. And we can go ahead and commit to that. I think that's the biggest issue. I think one of the biggest misconceptions is the Navy goes out and sits there and says, we have a lack of capacity. I disagree. We have capacity. We just don't have the commitment by the government and the contracts to go ahead and start. And this is what has happened actually with the workforce, because what happens with a workforce is you hire a workforce to build what are probably some of the most sophisticated, weapon systems in the world, a Navy warship. And then when you don't have anything to build for a few years, what does that workforce do? You can't keep them on the books. You have to lay them off. And then they're going to take their welding skills and go into construction or something else. And that's been the major problem is if you look at the workforce in the United States and shipyards in particularly, it's kind of like this big sine curve of peaks and troughs. And we're continually rehiring, firing.
So even with the Department of War focused on, Hegseth, I went with him to LA on the Arsenal of Freedom tour. And even with that focus, you're not getting the right contracts you need for Ingalls to build out a shipyard. That seems like a no-brainer.
Well, Pete, what Pete says is exactly what you want to hear. The problem is you need Congress to back it up. To say it is one thing, to have the money behind it is the next thing. And that's what we really need to see. And we're starting to see that. We're seeing longer term contracts come out, which is what you want. If I'm going to build an aircraft carrier up at Newport News, I don't want to build 1 aircraft carrier. I want to get the contract for 3. I want a firm commitment that I'm going to build 3. Because that allows me to extend out my workforce. Same thing with submarines, same thing with destroyers. And San Diego, they're building Navy underway replenishment ships. They're building 20 of them, but they're being funded 1 or 2 at a time, which makes the cost escalate. Because, if I'm NASCO in San Diego, I can't get over my skis and overcommit. Because what if this contract gets canceled and now I'm stuck with the component pieces for 10 oilers that are never going to be built?
Well, let's switch to the Persian Gulf. I was perusing your X channel, and you've got this traffic light up there. Persian Gulf, open or closed? Where does it stand at this point?
So Iran has never officially closed the Straits of Hormuz, and what I will say is this: okay, traffic is not going through the Straits of Hormuz, but it's not closed. And let me caveat that with this statement. If a door is wide open, but I don't go through it, the door's not closed. I'm just deciding not to go through it. The reason is this: the initiation of attacks by the U.S. and Israel against Iran really caught shipping by surprise. I think this is one of the big elements, even though everybody knew it was coming and everybody could kind of see it. One of the problems is shipping is risk adverse. And when I say risk adverse, I mean they do everything to minimize their downside. And ships to sail through the Persian Gulf right now require what's called war risk insurance. This is kind of like flood insurance for your house. If your house gets washed away in a flood and you don't have flood insurance, you're out of luck. It doesn't matter what other insurance you have. If you didn't have the right insurance, and that's war risk. You get hit by a drone, you get hit by a missile, you get hit by anything from the Iranians right now. You got to have war risk. What has happened is all the major coverers of the ships have announced they're rescinding the previous war risk insurance because it's too low. Basically they were paying, a fraction of a percent of the total value of the vessel. So what insurance companies do are reassessing. They're sitting there going, don't go through the Gulf. You have to buy new war risk insurance, and then trade will resume back through the Gulf. It was a very sudden. When we last saw this back in the 1980s, what we saw was a gradual escalation across 10 years. And so, you can accommodate war risk that period. A complete on switch of attacks now have caused that. As a matter of fact, what we just saw today was a kind of alert about that. A U.S. flagged tanker, the Stena Imperative, was sitting in the shipyard in Bahrain and got hit by at least 2 projectiles we know of. 1 dock worker killed, 2 wounded. The ship was damaged. Fortunately, none of the American crew were on board or injured at the time. But this is really highlighting the dangers. We've had several ship attacks go on. One outside the Strait of Hormuz on I think it's a Marshall Island flag vessel where 1 crewman was killed in the engine room. So, we're definitely seeing attacks on commercial shipping right now.
Yeah.
This is a special report.
Knowing how to invest your money is harder than ever before. Dealing with stock market volatility, record debt, and terrorist attacks requires new thinking. At U.S. Asset Management, we can help you see the world more clearly so that you can move beyond the chaos and invest with confidence. Call us, visit us online, or drop by our office. U.S. Asset Management, helping you make better decisions with your money.
A warm welcome here at the National Press Club. Welcome to the journalists, welcome to the Embraer team, and welcome to the other guests that we have here. We're going to announce, and as some of you guessed it right when they came in, the first E2 order by an American operator. And that operator is Avello. We believe this is really a strategic shift to unlock profitability for the customer. I'm very pleased that we have Andrew Levy here as the CEO of Avello, and I'm very pleased to give the stage to share a little bit more about what Avello is going to do with the E2 195. Thank you very much.
Couldn't be more excited to be here as part of this historic announcement. We have such a great cultural fit as companies, so we're very, very excited to be Embraer's newest customer. We launched our airline in April of 21, and our target is focusing on small secondary airports of large metro areas. We've carried over 8 million customers since we started on 63,000 flights. And we've done all these things with 1,200 of the greatest crew members I could ever imagine having, and many of them are here with me today. This is the right airplane for us. It's going to open up opportunities for us that no other aircraft can serve. The best thing about the airplane, of course, is you will not find a middle seat on this airplane. It doesn't exist. We won't have any to offer. It's going to be the best cabin in the United States, and we're so excited about that. This is going to elevate our experience to the highest level, and we think our customers are absolutely going to love the airplane.
What about merchant marine? I mean, we understand the Navy needs to build up, but what about the Mariner Force? Is it where it needs to be? And if not, what has to happen?
No, I mean, I think this is a really critical element. You can be a naval force, but that doesn't make you, a sea power, in my opinion, because you got to have the commercial merchant marine behind it. For example, most people don't know, the U.S. Navy, one out of 5 ships in the U.S. Navy, about 60 ships out of the 300 ships in the U.S. Navy are crewed by civilian merchant mariners, and they do probably one of the most unsung things is they provide the supplies. They do the refueling, the ammunition resupply. They bring the food, they bring the toilet paper, they bring all that stuff to the carrier strike groups out at sea, and they are basically defenseless. There's no weaponry on board the ships, and we're having a very hard time getting crews onto the ships. And there's a reason, lots of reasons for that, and a lot of that's being addressed right now, which is really, really good. But one of the things you want is to have your own kind of domestic merchant marine. One of the stories that I ran just earlier this week before the attack took place was there was a South Korean company called Sinkanor, and they were out there buying every large VLCC, very large crude carrier in the world they can get their hands on. And for a period of time there, for the next 30 days, they control about 2/3 of every crude carrier that comes into the Gulf Coast of the United States. Now, South Korea is an ally of us. This is an economic move. This is a really smart economic move that Sinkanor is doing. They're going to make a lot of money off this. But what if this wasn't South Korea? What if this was another country doing this and they decide at the last minute, hey, we're going to shift our ships somewhere else and we're not going to pick up loads in the Gulf? How does that damage the U.S. economy? And I think that's something we need to be aware of. Unfortunately, we only carry about 2% of our international trade on U.S. flag vessels. And to me, that is really dangerous. At the start of World War I, we sat there and saw what happened when all of a sudden all these merchant marines disappeared off our coast and goods piled up on our docks. And we were carrying 11% of our trade at that time. And now we're in a worse position than ever before. If you look around the world, 94% of the world's ships are built in 3 countries: China, South Korea, and Japan. And China's the largest. China is over 60% of that. We build less than 1%. I mean, it's a fraction of 1% of what we build. It's really small. And we need to not challenge China and get up to where they are, because we're never going to be able to outbid them. But what we need to do is make sure that we have a reservoir, a backup, so that we're not hurt should a country decide to hurt us economically.
So I'm an Air Force Academy grad. My son got accepted to the Merchant Marine Academy and West Point. He chose West Point. I'm sure one day he'll wonder if he should have taken that $250,000 a year job day one, right out the door at the Merchant Marine Academy. But how's the Academy doing? The other academies like Air Force have had some real problems with the woke stuff and really not doing what their mission is and supposed to be, as in training warriors and mariners. What about Merchant Marine? Where does it stand right now?
Well, Todd, I've taught at both the West Point and the Merchant Marine Academy, so okay. I can tell you right now, your son, either way, your son made a great choice. West Point is always a great choice. I love being up at the Point. I had a year up there that was one of the best teaching experiences I ever had. The Merchant Marine Academy, in many ways, is very reflective of the Merchant Marine. It's been neglected. It's been neglected in many ways. I mean, physically, it's been neglected. Their facilities, their accommodations are just woefully, behind the times and need substantial updating. They need, updating of curriculum, I would argue, and updating of technology, But at the same time, this is the only service academy of all of them, of Navy, of Coast Guard, of Air Force, of Army, that sends their midshipmen off into war. Right now there's cadets from the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy on ships out in the Persian Gulf right now, and so you don't tend to send cadets from the U.S. Army out to forward deployed military units all the time. And that's really unique. And like you said, what's interesting about the graduates from the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy is they become big leaders out there in industry. And their alumni is a very powerful alumni when it comes to shipping out there. We just saw 2 of their alumnus, hold some very, kind of significant positions. A new head of the Maritime Administration is a Merchant Marine alumnus out there. So that's a really good position for him to be in. So again, I think the Merchant Marine Academy is in many ways just been neglected over the years. And what we need is to get it kind of fired up. And I'm hoping we see that. Secretary Duffy has really focused an attention on this that hasn't been there for a long time. He's taken it under his wing. So hopefully we see some reform there.
Last question. Are we going to have an economic shock because of this war, as far as shipping and costs going up and inflation, goods, logistics, supply chain is the word I was looking for. Where are we on this? What's your crystal ball tell you?
Yeah, well, it really depends on the length and whether we see ships start going back through the Gulf or not. So
Mhm.
no matter what, we're going to see a shock to the oil prices. That's going to happen. And let's be clear, it shouldn't affect the United States, but it is because of just the sympathetic effect that we'll have on this. There's over 100 million barrels of oil afloat on tankers off the coast of Singapore right now, just waiting. Because that's what normally happens. You load up tankers, you sit off Singapore, and you look for the marketplace to go sell them to. So just because we shut down or artificially close the Strait of Hormuz for 2 days, that shouldn't cause a massive shock in the system, but it will. And we know it will because this is what oil markets do. It's what
Yeah.
speculators do. And we're going to see that happen. And because of the war, we're going to see escalating cost in movement of ships. We've seen the cost to charter a very large crude carrier jump over the past month from $50,000 a day to $150,000 a day. I saw an estimate today that it could go up to $500,000 a day to charter a ship that size. And so, that's going to be translated because every time we raise shipping costs, that gets translated over to the consumer. They're going to pay for it either, because the container ship carrying their goods the goods are going to cost more, or the oil to refine is going to be more at the pump when they go in. But at the same time, too, one of the things that we also will see is once this dust settles, if we have a safer Persian Gulf, Strait of Hormuz than we did afterwards, then maybe we won't get these frequent shocks to the system that have been happening for years. Because we
Right.
had these, kind of, starts and stops in the Persian Gulf. Oh, will the straits close? Will it not close? What's Iran going to do? Iran's been attacking ships in this area since 1981. So
Yeah.
this has been an
Yeah.
ongoing issue. When the president came out and talked about this, one of the things he kind of mentioned was shipping, but he didn't go into a lot of detail about it. But we've seen these attacks since 2019. We've had limpet mine attacks. We've had drone attacks. This has been a big problem, and it's raised costs. And let's not forget, too, the Iranians backed the Houthis in their attacks against shipping in the Red Sea starting in the end of 2023. So, I mean, we've seen these artificial hits to shipping. So maybe knocking down Iran will lead eventually to a stabilization in the economy. But for right now, yeah, you can expect to see some shocks in the economic system.
So tell us about your show and where people can follow you and all that good stuff.
Yeah, matter of fact, I was just editing a video for today talking about this tanker that got hit. I do a YouTube channel called What's Going On with Shipping. Started it 5 years ago when the Ever Given got stuck in the Suez. My buddy John Conrad came on for my first video. We got 3,000 views, and we thought that was awesome. And it's grown to over 600,000 subscribers now. It's just an amazing thing. When you find a little niche market, you do it. I'm on Twitter, obviously, at Mercogliano S. On Facebook, across all social media platforms. And then, like I said, I'm a professor. I chair the Department of History, Political Science, and Criminal Justice at Campbell University in beautiful North Carolina. Go Fighting Camels.
Yeah, man. So what happened to the Evergreen? Did you ever figure that out? Was that intentional? Or was
Ever
it
Given
just
was actually, it was just actually negligence. I would argue
Okay.
the ship's pilots on board, the Egyptian pilots, encountered wind. And what happened was these very large ships in a very narrow canal can start almost like pendulating in a canal because of the bank suction off it. And they did the worst thing you can do. In a situation like that, you slow down, they sped up. And what happened was they hoped to get better control by going faster. But what we saw happen was they just lost control. And so what we wound up with was a 1,300-foot ship with its bow smashed into Asia, its stern hung up in Africa. And for 6 days, global shipping was cut off. And one of the things we tend to forget is shipping is some of the most sophisticated, state-of-the-art technology in the world out there. But some of it is pretty old and redundant, down to a single individual on the helm of a wheel. And, it comes down to really, sometimes just pure faulty mistakes. But it's an industry that needs to be watched very closely because we depend on it. And, when we see these disruptions happen, when we saw what happened with Dolly in Baltimore, for example, that closed a major U.S. port. 2 to 3% of our exports come through there. Had that been Los Angeles, had that been Savannah, had that been Houston, had that been New York, New Jersey, it would have been cataclysmic for the economy of the United States.
Was that an accident or was that intentional?
Dolly was a series of errors, and I would argue there was a lot of human error in there, and it was human error on both sides, on the ship side, trying to hide things, and I think a little bit of negligence on our part, not really being very thorough in our inspections and
Gotcha.
really being thorough on it. Ships are really weird in that they're very sophisticated, but they're also very redundant and very hard to kind of mess around with. But the problem is that, again, it's human beings at the helm, and some of the human beings that are employed on ships can be easily swayed because they're not getting paid a lot. And to do something that can cause a problem is, just because we haven't seen evidence of anything specifically being done doesn't mean we should think for a moment that, hey, everything's fine and we should ignore it.
Sal, thanks so much, man. I want to have you back down the road.
Todd, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Yeah. All right, take care, my friend.